My presentation today is Editorial Conocimientos' narrative, Voicing Ways of Knowing. Reflecting on my trajectory as an academic and as the lead editor of Chicana Latina Studies, an interdisciplinary, peer-reviewed flagship journal. In this presentation, I discuss the ways in which a feminist and mentoring-based editorial process interrogates heteropatriarchy through the creation of relational spaces for self and public knowledge. I explore the ways individual and collective knowledge voice ideas that support social transformation. Conocimiento, a way of coming to self-knowledge in interaction with self and others, is central to my discussion because it facilitates an examination of our willingness to shed fears and emotional baggage in the publication process and in our activism. I talk about the ways in which we support one another without further harm to the individual and the collective as we create knowledge and activism, with the hope of exploring ways to usher one another through fear as we generate ways of knowing that foster a stronger sense of self and community, while expanding the work of Chicana Latina feminist studies. I hope to shed some light on the ways that I have navigated the academic-industrial complex to successfully shape and lead the future of Chicana and Chicano studies as we increase the presence of scholars in critical ethnic studies. Chicana Latina Studies, the Journal of Mujeres Activas en Letras y Cambio Social, although not always the first choice of publication for scholars, and even scholars of color, has for the last 10 years evolved into an interdisciplinary journal that expands the depth and breadth of scholarship to engage discussions that at best become marginalized in mainstream journals or are often rejected for not meeting the discursive agendas of traditional academic venues. In its publication praxis, those who are working with Chicana Latina Studies have carved out relational spaces for self and public knowledge as a way to open up sites of knowing that do not rely on knowing someone or gaining the sponsorship of senior faculty colleagues who open up doors as the only option for publication. Enveloped in the shadows of orality, most Mexican descent or Latina scholars are presumed to evolve in an oral culture. We perceive this as a position of strength, while still claiming that we have achieved the academic expectation of competence with a written word. For many of us, this conundrum of written versus oral literacy has emerged as a not knowing that distorts or disables our ability to convey the knowledge we carry and have amassed through our lived experiences, necessarily disempowering the ontological and epistemological differences that deviate from heteropatriarchal male notions of knowledge that exclude us because we supposedly do not fit inside that way of knowing. As Chicanas and Latinas, we live and understand in multiple cultures as position subjects in a myriad of social locations that shape our world and views of that with which we interact, often claiming the centrality of our racialized ethnicity, class, gender, and sexuality as central axes in which we locate divergent ways of knowing. Given our lived experiences, a space from which we theorize about social and cultural lives, as well as our respective locations inside the spaces, we have long moved beyond binary ways of knowing, as Ansaldúa offers. Quote, "You attribute this shift to the feminization of knowledge, one beyond the subject-object divide, a way of knowing and acting known as conocimiento, which questions conventional knowledges, current categories, classifications, and contents," close quote. This approach to the creation of knowledge necessarily requires us to move beyond the rational and to a holistic way of knowing that embraces the intuitive and spiritual as other ways of knowing ourselves in the context of understanding the world. It is this opening of our senses that facilitates our imaginary abilities to create ways of knowing that step outside the conventions we have learned to see as a proper way of knowing based on hierarchical structures that privilege some versus others. Departing from this point, we can then begin to shed notions that we're imposters in the academy because we lack the pedigree or the foundational knowledge that presupposes Western epistemologies of knowing that often negate or erase alternative ways of creating knowledge. As scholars, whether mentored to understand the culture of the academy and to recognize that publication is the locus of survival, we soon realize that the love for teaching and our desire to serve our communities are not sufficient. We must publish. A fear of writing, grounded in messages of the inferiority of oral knowledge, guides our path. Rather than acknowledging this devaluation and the inherited pain of our socialization as first-generation scholars or as mislabeled intellectuals who only know how to do rather than think or conceptualize the world around us, we internalize this as inability to write. Let me illustrate my point. In my academic experience, I have never heard a white male academic in the making regret their inability to write, nor have I known of one expressing hesitation to submit written work until it has reached a state of perfection. Most Euro-American colleagues I have known often submit work in progress, if only to receive information that will improve their manuscript for publication in another journal. There is no fear, no intimidation expressed, but a sense of knowing that the culture is there to give them what they need so they can move to the next step. On the other hand, women and people of color deem themselves as frauds in the academy, lest they submit papers that have reached a point of perfection, an unattainable benchmark that even we have not learned to evaluate. Fear of others and of being judged as less intelligent or as unable to clearly articulate our ideas keep us from submitting our work, with negative consequences for the individual and the collective community, as new PhDs fall off the treadmill after not getting tenure at their first or second institution. As Chicanas and Latinas, we have learned to live in between cultures, economies, and the politics of being. As Ansaldúa offers, quote, seeing through human acts, both individual and collective, allow you to examine the ways you construct knowledge, identity, and reality, and explore how some of yours or others' constructions violate other people's ways of knowing and living, close quote. We are learning from her word, departing from the sense of being in the world rather than compromising the power to create. We are writing and creating knowledge because we have recognized the flexible and fluid possibilities that are part of our realities, that it does not have to compare and contrast to others' reality because what we know can stand on its own right. It took me too long to learn this lesson. A tientas, feeling my way around, it was my innocence and naivete that brought me to my first publication in a premier women's studies journal. I had no madrina, no godmother or patron who instructed me on the art or formula of writing a manuscript. It was through my own initiative as a proactive student, engaging a process of self-education by reviewing and analyzing 3 years' worth of the journal archives to examine and learn the format and fact expectations to prepare my submission. Lo and behold, it was beginner's luck. My first effort yielded a publication, to later appear in an anthology on activism and leadership. My next effort was not so successful. My habit of using gerunds to begin paragraphs turned out to be a pet peeve for the editor of the journal. I had not been careful enough to write in the image of other submissions. The tenure bite was nipping at my heels. I did not follow the footprint of the journal or cite the feminists who had written on my topic, nor had I referenced them in any notes or works cited. A revise and resubmit is what I received for this effort. And not knowing the culture of publishing, this outcome brought me into despair, self-loathing, and hopelessness about my worth in the academy. I would later learn that about 70% of the people who received reject and resubmit notices never submit their manuscript again. Because I did not have an understanding that reject and resubmit was not a final decision, but a part in the process of publishing, that manuscript still remains buried in my files to be picked up at a later time because what I offered still has relevance and someone has yet to write about conocimiento and its pedagogical value in teaching students to reclaim themselves in the context of their collective history. Given the person that I am, I continued to seek venues for my ideas. In the interim, I wrote Las Hijas de Juan, Daughters Betrayed, a book that was published by Duke University Press in 2006. With an I will show them attitude that has always turned the you can't into an I will, I continue to write and publish my work. While some may see this I'll show you attitude as a disorganized way of coping with reality, for me it was a way to reconnect with my spirit so as to shift the negativity associated with publishing to continue writing and submitting my work. As a reflexive scholar, I continue to prioritize my writing so that I can make the contributions I have imagined possible. I feel a responsibility to write the stories I've been told and an obligation to implement the projects I carry. No one can write what I know. More importantly, I mentor and share what I'm learning along the way, having long realized that pain and rejection are not the pedagogical devices for advancing in our profession. I refuse to participate in the creation of a path of walking wounded as a legacy. Additionally, I have learned to value my work and recognize that elitism and pedigree are weapons of internalized oppression that divide us. These potential sites of injury no longer taint me or influence my direction. For it is self-interest and self-preservation that guide their work. I now depart from the assumption that I am as good, as equally prepared, and as intelligent as those who have attained their credentials from any Ivy League institution in our nation. As a feminist, I start with the assumption that each and every one of us is a carrier of knowledge. As a Chicana scholar who is accountable to my profession, as a lead editor of an interdisciplinary peer-reviewed flagship journal, I do not privilege one type of submission over another. I begin with the notion that each genre makes a contribution to the creation of knowledge, without assuming that only named institutions produce competent scholars. Thus, it is our policy to review every submission regardless of scholarly rank. Also, premised on the notion that writing creates a relational space for self and public knowledge, we mentor and prepare scholars who will be ready to take on the charges and responsibilities that come with our professional role, without taxing one area of our work over the other, as we encourage those who submit to seek institutional support, technical assistance, citation manual experts, and so on. When a junior faculty makes tenure, we all win. Self-knowledge and knowledge of self through others facilitates our willingness to shed fears and emotional baggage in the publication process and our activism as scholars. Scaffolding our knowledge, undergraduate or graduate copy editors, distribution managers, fact checkers, and proofreaders, we collectively engage the publication process as each one learns and teaches the other the everyday charges of bringing a journal to publication. Our collective success and non-hierarchical approach is the best way of mentoring up-and-coming Chicana and Latina feminist scholars. Our ways of knowing must be nurtured so that we may contribute to the creation of knowledge from a position of strength, so that we may successfully shape those who come behind us to lead the future of Chicana and Chicano studies, and to increase our presence as scholars in critical ethnic studies.